Good morning. Welcome to Psyfeld. Today's featured episode is The Apology. So just kicking things off for the group, any particular scene, any place you'd like to start today?
Kramer always being in the shower, doing everything in the shower, even installing garbage disposal in the shower.
Okay, so Kramer's behavior. If Kramer were to present to clinical practice and his chief complaint is somehow linked to the behavior you just observed, and let's say that he's coming in with a friend, a third party referral, what might the friend tell you the reason for the visit is? Beyond what, like, how might that behavior be described by someone close to Kramer in a clinical setting?
Would it be a compulsion?
There's like a compulsion. So let's not lose the opportunity here. What is a compulsion?
Something that you feel like you need to do, and then you get some sort of release after.
Release from what?
Internal sort of feeling of satisfaction, almost after you did whatever behavior it was.
And why do people? That's exactly right. Why do people feel satisfied after performing? It's a behavior, right? Performing this behavior that is clinically termed a compulsion. It's because it alleviates anxiety, right? It's a way to release anxiety, alleviate anxiety, right? By the way, if you're asked on a shelf exam, maybe the defense mechanism that underlies these ritualistic behaviors called compulsions. Any guesses? Whether it's cleaning, checking, washing one's hands, washing one's body in a shower.
Something to do with control.
Undoing. Yeah, undoing. Right. So, all right, we have to keep this in our differential diagnosis. And if it rules in, what might be a diagnosis to consider here for Kramer in this particular episode?
OCD.
Yeah, obsessive compulsive disorder. But in your clinical vignette, on your shelf exam, there are no obsessions. What now is your single best answer? It's a trick question. It's OCD, right? So it's a clinical pearl, right? It's definitely important to remember, and it's a clinical pearl that can be reflected on shelf exams. Individuals do not need both obsessions and compulsions to rule in for OCD. One or the other, if there's clinical significance, which, by the way, is always our guide in terms of diagnosing someone with a disorder, then OCD becomes your single best answer. Before I leave this part of the conversation, we've delineated what a compulsion is. What's an obsession? It's an abnormal thought, right? It's an abnormal thought, usually described as intrusive. Right? So many of us have abnormal thoughts, whether you care to acknowledge and agree or not, but only some of us have those thoughts become intrusive, and therefore only some of us would have those thoughts clinically termed an obsession. Right? What's the difference between an obsession and a delusion, since delusions are also abnormal thoughts?
Delusions are not grounded in reality.
Yeah, so there's two major criteria to differentiate, and that is the first, right? They're not grounded in reality. And
they persist in evidence of the contrary.
Perfect, right? That's it. And when you see the contrary, we're going to call it, among other things, an obsession. There's a differential diagnosis there. Don't have to get into that right now. But suffice it to say that one of those clinical terms that we would grasp would be the obsession. Good. All right, so back to Kramer. We have a potential obsessive compulsive disorder. By the way, in this episode, anybody here watch Seinfeld? Never, huh? Those numbers dwindle every year. If you cheat, and this is like season 9, I think, right?
Yeah.
There's 8 previous seasons. My question would be, is this an enduring pattern of behavior, right? Because might this, that is the diagnosis of OCD, be supported? And we don't know, right? So, and by the way, that parallels medicine. A lot of times we don't know the history of our patient until we ask, and there's no way we could ask Kramer. That would be an awesome grand rounds, but until they say that is Kramer, perhaps other actors say that they co-host the grand rounds with us at Robert Wood, it's not happening. So let's leave it on differential. What else might we include here? What else would that third party perhaps tell us as a clinician? How would it be described?
Showers for too long.
So showers for too long. Mhm.
It can't get clean.
Seems to not be able to get clean. Mhm.
Do everything in the shower.
Yeah. And again, how might one describe that behavior, just in the general sense?
Avoiding reality.
Well, that's, yeah, so, and I think testing reality here is getting back to the idea of a delusion is necessary for an assessment of this character in this episode. The other word I'm looking for is that it's likely to be termed bizarre. Right, and that B word comes up with a couple of diagnoses. And by the way, maybe not showering, but I can assure you that Kramer's behavior is bizarre in an enduring way, starting with season 1. Right. So when we see that persistent pattern of behavior, using the word bizarre, are there others, or the differential now that we should consider? Yeah. Yeah, personality disorders. I'm sorry, you said?
I was saying, depending on how long it's been going on, it's the personality disorder.
Yes, at least 9 years.
Okay.
I can, again, for those of you who have not watched Seinfeld, I can assure you it's at least 9 years. Right. All right. So, and what personality disorders might have the word bizarre used to describe them?
Schizotypal,
One,
schizoid.
good. Two, right? And maybe paranoid. I'm basically getting at the cluster A personality disorders. Right. Again, we don't have to get into any more detail beyond that, but I would think that the cluster A personalities would be in the differential diagnosis to discuss the behavior in the shower in the apology. Any other evidence for Kramer in this episode that would broaden our differential diagnosis? Anything else you picked up on or want to discuss?
His like
No raising hands.
so sorry.
No apologizing either.
It's the intro. Like his behavior in the bathroom clearly shows like that he has a like problem with boundaries or like sort of taking social cues. So you could like include autism or other types of disorders like that.
Yeah, and here we'd have to watch the prequel, right? I want to see the etiology of this behavior and did it have its onset in childhood, right? That's something that to consider as well. I agree. Yep, good. And by the way, that difficulty that we see in Kramer of not being able to focus on these or pick up on social cues is also consistent with the schizoid and schizotypal personality disorder. So that observation actually does support, I think, at least 2 of our working diagnoses here. Good. All right. Anything else on Kramer you'd care to discuss? This was good. All right. Now, I would assume that there are other characters whose behaviors caught your eye. So in the apology, who else would you like to talk about? We got
Elaine.
Elaine. So what's going on with Elaine?
Well, I guess her coworker Peggy seems to be avoiding her, and I just thought her reactions to that were interesting.
How would you describe her reaction to Peggy's behavior?
An overreaction.
As evidenced by? What did she do?
Rubbing the keyboard.
Is that-
Rubbing the keyboard on her butt and then the staple on her armpit and calling down the doorknob.
Yeah, not talk about social cues. Yeah. All right, so let's look at Elaine first here and her reaction. Thoughts? And the answer is yes. I'll provide. I'll be that collateral informant. This is an enduring pattern of behavior. We've seen this before, right? The reaction is beyond which we would expect, given the nature of the stimulus. Okay, in this case, Peggy's behavior. So, thoughts? And if not, are there any questions you'd like to ask Elaine?
Like also observing that she's had like, seems like she has multiple sexual partners. I was thinking also more of like a personality disorder, maybe like histrionic or what's the one where there's to, yes, histrionic.
Histrionic? So what is histrionic personality disorder? And before you answer, let me break this down. This is not the first time you're going to hear this. I'm going to say this several times. My understanding is that the way you prepare for personality disorders, especially on a shelf exam, is to look at 3 groups or clusters. And clinically, that's relevant because these groups of disorders do tend to share or cluster symptoms. And you have to acknowledge that, you have to appreciate that. That does mean that individuals, perhaps like Elaine, that might appear on shelf exams might actually demonstrate multiple characteristics shared by disorders, especially within that cluster, right? So, and I get that. For a second step to really understand these personality disorders and have really little difficulty finding that single best answer on a shelf exam, I want you to throw all 10 personality disorders back into a hat, and I want you to reorganize them. I want you to put them in column A, those that actually adhere to a common trait, a cardinal trait, and column B, those that don't. Because once you do that, after kind of learning it the first time around, what becomes obvious is that all those DSM criteria, all the information contained in your clinical vignette on the shelf exam are nothing more than examples of that cardinal feature. It really makes a ton of sense. And it's really easy to pick up when you are provided that vignette. And that translates to clinical practice as well. What is the cardinal feature? So I'm going to give it to you. The histrionic personality disorder, yes, is in column A. It's in cluster B and in column A. What is that cardinal feature?
Conceiving.
Yep. Right. The individual with histrionic personality disorder, by definition, needs to be the center of attention. That's the bottom line. They need to be the center of attention. And then, and we're not going to get into it at this point, but when you look at your favorite board review book, when you review all those diagnostic criteria, they are like example after example of that cardinal feature. And it becomes really simple to, well, not simple, but easier to learn. Right? I guarantee you guys. Is there any evidence that Elaine needs to be the center of attention? Or, of course, that also means that when she's not the center of attention, she tolerates it with significant anxiety or frustration.
I guess when Peggy called out sick, I guess it was her boss who said that, making Peggy kind of the center of the conversation. He was uncomfortable and tried to, badmouth her, calling for a walkout and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And if we see that as an enduring pattern of behavior, there might be something there, right? That behavior in isolation, we, as a psychiatrist, we have to leave alone. We'll closely observe. We understand that it might be problematic, but if it's an enduring pattern of behavior, that's completely different, right? So from that point of view, I think histrionic personality disorder should remain a differential diagnosis, right? What other cluster B personality disorders are there?
I'm just seeing this follow.
Borderline one.
Is that
Is it borderline?
borderline? Good. 2 more. Antisocial personality disorder, 1, and narcissistic personality disorder. Good. I'm not going to get into the details. We'll talk about the personality disorders certainly during the course of your 6-week rotation. Suffice it to say today that 3 of those 4 do have that cardinal trait. The one that doesn't is borderline personality disorder. And unfortunately for you guys, it is the one that I think most commonly appears on exams. So, I mean, I guess with the glass half full, you're going to have to learn it anyway. And those that are less common on exams, those other 3 do have that cardinal feature. And the cardinal feature for histrionic personality is that need to be the center of attention. Yeah. Anything else with Elaine beyond cluster B personality traits, rule out disorder, might explain her behavior towards Peggy?
She can't stand not being liked.
Yeah. Yeah. So if that's the case, and she presents the clinical practice, what are some questions we have for Elaine?
And we can look at like social anxiety disorders or anything where she feels, concerned going out, interacting.
Yeah, so I would definitely look at the anxiety disorders in a spectrum. There are 3 different sets of anxiety disorders now, that is previous to the DSM-5. there was an anxiety disorders chapter which the APA changed with the publication of the DSM-5. And that is, as of 2013, those 3 separate chapters include, number 1, the one that kept its name, anxiety disorders. Number 2, the obsessive compulsive and related disorders. And the 3rd are the trauma and stressor related disorders. Right. So, and I think all 3 might be on the table when you identify this problematic behavior. Again, it's only problematic because in my scenario, Elaine is actually presenting the clinical practice with a chief complaint related to this. Right. So I do think the anxiety disorders are on the table here as well. I'm not going to get into any more detail, although, well, no, I won't. All right, it's too much of a tangent. We only have about 10 minutes left. So, but just to kind of set the framework, 3 sets of anxiety disorders now as per the APA. Anything else for Elaine? And we are going to get into a little bit more detail with the next set of questions, and that's going to focus on Peggy. What's going on with Peggy?
Germaphobe.
Yeah, right. She's called a germaphobe. I think that's the word that's used here. So that will not appear on your shelf. There is no such clinical term. However, what is your differential?
OCD.
OCD. That's certainly in fair play here.
Illness anxiety disorder.
Illness anxiety disorder. So what is illness anxiety disorder?
Hypochondria.
Yeah, it's the form name of hypochondria, right? It's the preoccupation with having or acquiring a serious illness, right? The or acquiring part is the revision of the DSM-5. So too is the change in name. Interestingly, illness anxiety disorder, for reasons unknown, at least to me, remains in a separate chapter. That is, it was not included in the anxiety disorder spectrum. Certainly not part of the OCD and related disorders chapter of the DSM. It's actually in the somatic symptom and related disorders, which is misplaced. So my guess is that with the next revision, it will be moved. But for now, we're going to call it a somatic symptom and related disorder, but certainly it's in our differential here, despite the APA's mistake. Wink, wink. Others here? Well, if somebody's called a germaphobe.
Specific phobia.
Yeah. So I think they have a specific phobia to germs. So, and one of the reasons why the term germaphobe is not going to come up on the shelf is because the DSM again revised this. We don't have specific names for specific fears anymore. That's good news on shelf exams, right? That's cool for party games. Well, for those of us going into psychiatry anyway, but for the clinician, that's all scrapped. And we have now just 4 basic subgroups of phobias. Any guesses as to what they are?
Agoraphobia.
Agoraphobia is actually not a subgroup. It's a separate diagnosis. That is, it's a diagnosis separate from specific phobia, but certainly would be in the differential diagnosis. The subgroups of phobia, these groups that describe fears include animal type, situational type, environmental, and blood injection injury. Right, those are the 4. And now, where do germs fit in? They don't. Good. Right. So there is other. There's that 5th and grab bag category, within which Peggy appears to fall. Other, right? By the way, clowns, other. So some of the more common phobias don't even fit in this artificial categorization of specific phobia. What is a phobia?
Pervasive fear, but impeding regular life.
Yeah. And that impedance is going to cut through every disorder, right? There's only a few exceptions to that rule. So we always have to keep that in mind, especially clinically. We're not going to actually label it as an illness or disorder unless it impacts behavior, unless it results in clinically significant distress or impairment. All right, so that's specific phobia. Any other, we only have like 5 minutes left. Any other characters you want to discuss? What's going on with Jerry and George in this particular episode?
When George was invited to a rageaholics meeting. And he does have a pervasive pattern of outbursts.
Yeah, so I think there's two teaching points here. One is a little bit tangential, and that is addiction-like behavior does go beyond substances. And that's reflected again in the latest revision of the DSM, where the chapter itself, the addictive disorders chapter of the DSM, is actually broken down into two components, right? The substance-related disorders and the non-substance related disorders. Now, while rage is not included yet, there are two, right? One is actually in the chapter, one is in the glossary, but there are two. What are the two non-substance related addictions? Good. Gambling disorder. Good. Internet gaming disorder. Yeah, right. That, it's in a chapter that requires further study, but it's there. Right. So good. Anybody here see the film Rounders? It's a must-see film. It's a must-see film, period. But it's also a must-see film to really get into the differential of gambling disorder. Ready Player One, internet gaming disorder. I think I just got 2 years that must-see movie. And if you watch it, I want to know if you got it. You'll know what I mean when you watch it. Did you get it? Did you guess? All right, but I'm not going to go down that tangent either. It's a rabbit hole. So I think that first and foremost is number one. The other thing, rageaholic. What illness might we consider here?
Intermittent explosive disorder.
Exactly right. Intermittent explosive disorder, which is an impulse control disorder, right? And we're going to end by kind of like circling back to this recategorization of illness that I mentioned before. What is the differential diagnosis among the orders of impulse control, with the intermittent explosive disorder being one?
Oppositional defiance.
Good. ODD. And now we can look that there are like adult onset versus child onset. That is going to go into the child onset column, ODD. Good.
Conduct disorder.
That's another one in the child column, right? Which means that we're not going to talk about it this morning. We'll wait for Dr. I to get in here and provide that education.
Does ADHD fall into it?
I do not believe ADHD falls under it, but I will defer to Dr. Olaria.
Disruptive mood dysregulation.
That doesn't fall under it either. That's still in the child chapter. That one I do know. The other ones are adult.
It would be for rounding out personality more, like antisocial personality disorder.
Correct. It would not. And that's a great point, because when intermittent and explosive behavior manifests, the clinician must make sure that it is not due to another mental disorder, and antisocial personality would be very high in that differential. Right, so would acute mania. So it would not, that would not count. No, that would, that's a separate disorder. Other disorders of impulse control beyond intermittent explosive disorder, which George may or may not have. Trichotillomania. Okay, now I'm going to put a star next to that one. We're going to get back to why in a second. Pyromania. And good, kleptomania, good. Those are the disorders of impulse control, to self or others. Self, trichotillomania, pyromania, kleptomania, others, IED, right? Trichotillomania, that had been removed from this chapter and is now categorized as an obsessive compulsive and related disorder. That is a disorder related to OCD. Right? So even though I introduce it in the spectrum of impulse control disorder, the fact is that it has been recategorized and is now in the other chapter. That is the OCD and related disorder chapter of the DSM-5. Right. Once again, referring back to that chapter. Any questions about the differential for intermittent explosive behavior? Again, the bottom line here, read your clinical vignette closely. Number one, any consideration of mental illness must always evaluate for the direct and physiologic effects of a substance, as well as an underlying medical condition. That's going to cut across the board. And for these conditions, we must always consider another mental disorder as well. That is, these impulse control disorders must be not elsewhere classified. And certainly a condition like antisocial personality would be a great example of that. Questions about disorders of impulse control? Any other observations of the apology in general?
The whole back and forth is like being naked. I was thinking about that.
Being negative,
I think it was Susan. Or, I don't know, I forgot their name, but her and I guess her husband, they were, you know, she was like naked in the house and like, you know, he was like, well, there's good naked and there's bad naked. So he tried to use an example to like prove his point. And then they were just closed at the end of the whole show. I'm just confused. I was just
So where can we possibly, and this is Jerry and his girlfriend, right? And where can we take that segment of behavior and fit it in a didactic on behavioral health and psychiatry?
Bizarre.
It fits under the B word. I totally agree. Let me paraphrase what Jerry Seinfeld is thinking, in that to move from fantasy to behavior is a progression that is not automatic. So some things are just left to fantasy because when they become reality, they're nowhere near as appealing as perhaps they once were. Do we see anything like that in psychiatry? Is that an actual, could that be part of an actual theory of human behavior? That's the id versus the superego, right? Our id houses our base impulses, very few of which we act on because of our conscious awareness that if these impulses ever did become conscious, they would be imminently threatening. Now, the funny example would be to see a member of the opposite sex naked. Right? But that's where this goes, right? So the superego operates along the reality principle and is that protective mechanism of our central nervous system that ensures that these taboo impulses stay subconscious. Right? Now, that's a problem, right? Because it's that little devil on your right telling you what you want to do. And it's that angel on your left that's telling you what you're allowed to do. That's friction. What did Freud call that friction? Between those two equal and opposing forces that are in our subconscious. Call it anxiety. Right? And that goes for everybody here. Right? Everybody's got that little devil chirping, you know, get up and leave. It's a Friday. You do not want to be here. Right? Your superego that is just cemented in white coats. What an externalization of superego with pressed white coats. It's telling you don't do it. Right? Either repress it or even suppress it. Right? So at 4 o'clock, that thought can come to conscious awareness. Suppression. That's friction. But I'm looking at your eyes and I'm not reading much anxiety today. Right? I'm really not. Maybe it's the masks, but I'm really not. Why? Is Freud wrong? It's because of that third and final part of your subconscious called the ego. That's main goal is to reduce the anxiety caused by the friction between the id and the superego. And everyone here seems to have adaptive ego defense mechanisms at play to ensure that the anxiety does not become overt and that you're not diagnosable with an anxiety disorder. Right? So that's how we'll close today. Again, getting back to a little bit of the etiology of the very disorders we discussed today, including the phobias and other related disorders. Right? We'll stop there. We will log off. We'll log back on with table rounds in a matter of moments. See everybody back there.